Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to Modern Leadership, the podcast where each week we sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and leaders to explore their journey, diving into the ups, their downs, and ultimately the lessons they learned along the way. Our goal, of course, is to show that everything is figure-outable. Today's guest expert is Christopher O'Donnell. Christopher is the Senior Vice President of Hubspot Product, which he led from startup to successfully publicly traded company. He is a frequent guest lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management and has built dozens of web and mobile products. Outside of his day job, Christopher spends his time as songwriter and guitarist for the band The Providers, who release music on a regular basis through their site. Christopher, a man of many talents, welcome to Modern Leadership.
Hey, Jake. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah. So before we jump into all of this, we got a picture of who you are today, a little bit of your business and some of the fun things that you do, but give us a little bit more. Tell us, who is Christopher O'Donnell?
Oh, great question. When I find out, I'll let you know. I think before anything else, it's definitely about family for me. Being a father and a husband comes before everything else, and everything is really ultimately in service of that. And I have two little kids and a wonderful wife, married my high school sweetheart. So, that's really what life is about for me. And then outside of that, it's really music and technology. And those are two things that I've been involved in basically my whole life in one way or another, kind of growing up with technology, growing up coding and building and, just kind of mixing in everything I can get my hands into with technology, and also playing music, storytelling, songwriting, and the kind of overlap of the two is where I try to draw inspiration for what I bring to the table as a leader.
Yeah, very cool. And take us back to that time when you started getting into this technology. I mean, my guess is you were one of the front runners.
Yeah, I was. I was born in 1981, and so I was probably that first generation that grew up with some sort of home computer laying around. I got a hand-me-down.
We called ours a Nintendo. I don't know what you called
yours. Yeah, exactly. So I was a kid, when Mario Brothers came out. I was right in their prime demographic. So I'm definitely the Nintendo generation. I'm the oldest, basically the oldest possible person who could technically be considered a millennial. So I'm like the oldest millennial alive. But I got an Apple II GS hand-me-down from my cousins, and it didn't come with any software, any floppy disks or anything. So I just had the command line prompt. And really just kind of trial and error started teaching myself how to code. I was probably 10 and, built myself little games and built myself things to kind of entertain myself. And then from there, I kept falling haphazardly and coincidentally into computer science classes. And, I learned how to build websites. I did my first HTML class in like 1994. Which, it was a very strange time to be doing that kind of thing. It's like a really common thing to do these days. But back then, I'm amazed that they even had classes. And then, I did CS in high school and college. And I didn't connect the dots that you could do it for a living until sort of my mid-20s and realized, hey, there are these people who are software engineers and they build stuff that people use, and it's really fun and creative and rewarding, and requires collaboration and leadership and vision and all of these things. And by the way, there are these people called product managers and designers who work with the software engineers to help them figure out what to build. And once I kind of got into that line of work, I was totally hooked.
Yeah, I want to take you a little bit and talk about this, the power of timing. And I've been reading this book by Mike Michalowicz this week called Surge. And it talks about, how the power of the wave, the surge of the wave, builds for these different things. And I'm a couple years older than you. So I was born in 77. And so I'm the very tail end of Gen X. And I would tell you, we didn't even have computers in my high school until my senior year. So as far as HTML, as far as even typing classes for me, and I'm just, like we talk about 4 years behind you. So I want to talk a little bit, or 4 years, I guess, ahead of you. Let's talk a little bit about this power of timing, particularly in the technology space.
Well, it worked out very well for me. I was my senior year, we got the internet. So we had computers. I did grow up typing. I'm just a slightly, as you point out, just a few years later, things had already really shifted. And then, forever after my generation, after I graduated high school, they had cell phones and, then iPhones and email and all this kind of stuff. So we joke that we need to try to, make our money and do our career as fast as possible because these kids are going to take our jobs, which is kind of true, and it's just getting younger and younger and younger, the point at which people are learning how to build web apps and learning about entrepreneurship, learning about startups, learning about, venture capital and funding and all this kind of stuff. My godson is my nephew. William is 17 years old and he already has a startup and is coding and all this kind of stuff. And it's amazing to think what that's like. And I introduced him to my friend here at work, who's our chief architect. And we get halfway through the conversation. And I said, imagine being 17. And he said, in 2019, with all of these tools and the internet and all this accessibility. So on one hand, I didn't grow up with all of that, but I did grow up with the tools to make websites and the tools to start to kind of think about branding and identity and do it all yourself. And I think that that's probably, in terms of answering your question, the big surge here. And the same surge has happened in music, by the way, where you used to need $20 million and 3 years to build a technology product. And now you don't. Now you need a weekend, to get something going yourself that you can show people and get feedback and start to validate your ideas.
There's pros and cons with that, right? I mean, in the past, $20 million, really, that was how you could set you apart. That's how you were different, is you went out, you raised the money, you got some backers, you pitched your product, and then you created it. And there was no competition or very little competition because who could raise that kind of funding? Nowadays, where you can build it over the weekend, the competition is fierce. And you're not just competing with people who are good. There's always going to be good people around the world that are trying to do the next big thing. But you're also competing with people who are kind of good looking on the outside, but inside they don't have the technology, they don't have the right stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. And then it's just natural selection, from there. I think it's entirely a good thing, I have to say, and with music, not having to go to a record label to make a record, I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, or not having to go to a publisher to write a book.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's absolutely great. Now, if you go to a publisher, you're going to get distribution. You're going to get, perhaps a wonderful, super experienced editor. Maybe you're going to write a better book.
Maybe you get an advance. Yeah, there's some pros to it, but there's also now it's leveled the playing field so that more and more people can get involved.
That's exactly right. I mean, the problems that you and I have in our daily lives that could be solved by technology. Geez, if there's a teenager in some developing country that comes up with a novel way to solve that problem and they become a millionaire, I think that's wonderful. I don't think that it should all be, Sandhill Road and Bay Area and Cambridge and New York venture-backed startups that solve the hard problems of the world. I think, we should be optimizing as a race for the best ideas and getting them to the forefront, for sure.
And that's the amazing thing about technology. We took a year as a family and lived abroad. We started our journey in the Philippines, and we were in a little town that I had to set my computer up at night because that was when the Wi-Fi was strongest to upload my podcast. It took 8 hours to upload the podcast. And yet there was a guy in the house just next door to us that was running his online business. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity. It's leveled the playing field so that worldwide, we're not just getting those who have been born into, what we would call first world countries, but now we have people who have intelligence, have drive, have passion, that now have the opportunity to showcase that to the world.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's super exciting.
So one of the things you said earlier that I thought was kind of interesting is you said, this 17-year-old nephew of yours and the generation that's up and coming is going to take the jobs away from older people. And I wanted to question you on that because I actually think that we're all going to be competing for the new jobs. If you look at statistics, jobs that are being created right now are not the same types of jobs that were 10, 15 years ago. You think podcasting, When I went into high school, if somebody would have said, hey, Jake, what do you want to do when you get older? I couldn't have said, hey, I want to be a podcaster, right? Because this is in the early 90s. Podcasting didn't even come out until after 2000. So tell me a little bit about where you see kind of technology taking the job market into the future.
Yeah, it's a good question. And my comment is definitely tongue in cheek. I think that, Steve Jobs really had it right when he said the most powerful person in the room is the best storyteller. And, of course, as we gain experience in our lives, those stories that we're able to tell become deeper and more meaningful and richer. And if you look at folks who are starting these unicorn companies, these billion-dollar companies, the average age is not, a teenager or somebody in their 20s. It's closer to our age. It's somewhere between my age and your age. And these are people who have a lot of experience and have seen stories and seen companies grow and develop. So I think what's going to happen is the curve of building and that, how difficult it is to get to market with a product is becoming easier and easier and easier. It'll never get to zero. But I was just reflecting with a friend of mine who's a CTO, multiple startup founder, serial entrepreneur, very successful guy. And we were just looking at, the types of technologies that you would use if you were to start a company from scratch today. And what you get for free out of the box in terms of tools to build, it's just stunning what you can do. I mean, you literally can build a working web application in a few hours. And so what that does is it puts additional emphasis on marketing, distribution, and the storytelling kind of aspect of this, the financial aspect of really finding the fit with the market, finding your target customer. And those are things that actually require a great deal of maturity and experience. And so I think that the jobs are largely going to emphasize, especially the more senior leadership jobs are going to emphasize those skills. And it'll be really interesting. I think, if you're a software engineer, I think you have pretty good job security. But I think that there's going to be this additional layer of folks who understand the building process and then also how that ties to and loops back to the customer experience and the whole financial outlook of the enterprise that you're building. So I do see some shifts, and I see it going to a much more cross-functional storytelling kind of skill set.
Yeah, and as I look at like the marketing wave that's building nowadays, in the past it was a one-to-many scenario where you could put up a billboard or you could advertise on television during the Super Bowl, or that's how you got eyeballs on your product. But now we're starting to enter this phase where it's not one-to-many. It's as much as we can make our customers, our clients, feel that it's one-to-one, and it's through that storytelling. And we've had a couple of storytelling experts on the podcast in episodes past, but I want to get your take on it. How do we as leaders become better storytellers, particularly when it comes to marketing, storytelling through marketing, or marketing through storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, there are some templates, there are some starting points. I think Donald Miller, has a good one with Story Brand. That's definitely, a huge aspect of, the foundation, I think, is if you understand his 7 steps, that's a great starting point to wrap your head around. I have a coach, I think getting help and getting feedback is absolutely critical. Internal communications, external communications, the way you tell the story, the whole message that you're bringing both to your team and to the world. I mean, I see marketing, by the way, and selling is 100% of what we're doing, all the time. Is we're always trying messages and iterating and updating those messages. So if you want to be a better storyteller, improve the feedback mechanism on your storytelling. And, if you give a talk, get video of the talk, watch the video of the talk. It's incredibly painful to do, but it is enormously helpful. That's one. And the last thing I'll say is really emphasize the human story. There's no product in the world that doesn't have a human involved in it somehow. There's nothing that is so technical that you cannot tell the value story of it through the eyes of an actual human in their life. And I think that that's really the key to it. When we give talks internally, even, it always starts with a person and their name and their face and their life experience, and using that as an illustration of whatever the topic the change, the sort of leadership that you're bringing to the table. Always position it through the lens of actual human experience. That's a great default.
Yeah, and I love how you phrased it in that there is no product, there is no service, there is nothing out there that is completely void of human influence, human involvement. And so look deep for that story, tell that story. And that goes back to what I was saying about this one-to-one. That's the way to communicate one-to-one, is through this real human element. So I want to take you back now to the story that we started and continue on this journey. So you're going through kind of the high school, your younger age, you're really passionate about this computer stuff. All of a sudden a door starts to open that, previously or when you were younger, you didn't even know existed. How do you go from that point to where you are today?
People believing in me when I skin my knees, and me believing in people when they skin their knees. It's as simple as that. Certainly in this industry, I think the entire idea of imposter syndrome can be dealt with rather quickly by realizing that we're all imposters. I mean, we're all making this up as we go along. I love your comment about everything is figure outable. That's exactly it. And developing a mindset around curiosity, the humility to take feedback and really listen. That's really what it's been for me. I haven't, no one bats 1,000. I've made, huge mistakes along the course of my career. And I've been lucky to have people who have believed in me, that I've been able to work for, who have given me, second chances and third chances, and, the opportunity to learn and do better. And then also, a big part of my leadership style is passing that along and finding folks who are developing in their careers and just really becoming involved in their careers more than being a manager. It's like, to use a sports metaphor, I don't want to be the quarterback. I don't want to even be the coach of the team. I don't want to be the owner of the team. I want to be the agent. I want to be the person who's trying to get the players onto the field in a way where they're going to reach their maximum potential. And that might mean switching teams and asking somebody to exit. I stay very involved in people's careers. Once I get involved, I'm there. I'm very involved in my friends' careers. They're always bouncing stuff off of me. I'm very involved in the careers of the people on my team, obviously. And even when people leave, I stay very involved. If somebody goes to do a startup or something like that, or to take a different role, or as they grow into management here, whatever it is, try to really give them huge opportunities and believe in them the way that I've been lucky to as well. And the last thing I'll say is, I joined Hubspot, and it was just a total rocket ship. And, holding on to the rocket ship is a good way to bring your career along pretty quickly, I would say. We think about early stage startups a lot. I think there's a kind of glamour to early stage startups that makes a lot of sense. Building something from nothing is thrilling and exciting and sort of dangerous and a lot of fun. But I joined this company in the scale up stage. 200 employees to 3,000 employees, from 40 million in revenue to 600 million in revenue, whatever it is. That is a great chapter to see. In the next chapter, from 3,000 employees to 10,000 employees, to $1 billion in revenue and beyond, whatever God has in store for us here, whatever it may be. Those are just fascinating stories to watch and learn from. And so I think that's been a huge piece of it too. If you join a fast growing team and a fast growing enterprise, you have an opportunity to grow pretty quickly yourself.
Yeah, and in that little bit that you just said, that there was so much to unpack. I'm over here scribbling notes and everything. Your leadership philosophy, this idea of not being the coach, not being the quarterback, but really being an agent, I think is a unique perspective on leadership that, frankly, in over 250 episodes of the podcast, we have nobody's light bulbed me in that way with their version or their look at leadership. And I think that is such a valuable way to look at it. And I love how you said that. An agent is always looking out for the best role, not just for the team, but for the player. And you said in your talk there that even if the player needs to go be on a different team, that's okay, because what you care about is developing people, and leaders need to develop people. And I want to go back to one thing that you said about nobody bats 1,000. And I heard this quote idea just a couple of days ago that if you're playing baseball and you get a hit 1 out of every 4 times, you're an okay player. You're probably going to have a position on the team. If you get a hit 1 out of every 3 times, you're a Hall of Famer. And that's an amazing way to look at things. A great metaphor for life is that you don't have to bat 1,000, but you do have to be slightly above average. You need to work a little bit harder to get yourself to that 1 out of 3 instead of 1 out of 4. And I want to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it was the Dalai Lama who said, when you lose, don't lose the lesson. And that's, I think, the difference between batting 250 and batting, 333. How much do you go back to the tape? How much do you go back to the lessons and analyze your swing? Or, switching to football for a second, Brady and Belichick are famous for watching game tape. And yes, we can make jokes about that, but that's all they do. Like Tom Brady doesn't go to the movies, really. Like he watches himself and he watches other quarterbacks and he just watches and learns everything he can about his own performance, everything he can about the state of the art of the game, and is totally focused and obsessed on that. I think that that's the huge opportunity, is that, as leaders, as individual contributors, whatever it is, we're actually not that great at getting feedback. And the feedback, this is the irony, it's everywhere. And it's totally free. Your peers know your fatal flaws. They know. Your peers know if you're doing well. Your boss may or may not know, but the people on your team, the peers that you're working with every day, if you're actually open to their feedback, they will give it to you. And that, to me, is the difference between batting 200 and batting 400. It's an honest willingness to hear from people. This is where you can grow. This is, and also, this is what we need from you. That's language I hear daily in my role. It's, Christopher, here's what we need from you. And, how do you create an environment where people are being asked explicitly for just the piece of the puzzle where they add value and where everybody is looking to them for leadership or for execution or for crisp decision making or for strategic mindset and context around what those teams are working on, and then, deliver that.
Well, and that's how you become indispensable, right? Is because you anticipate needs and people can rely on you when they have a need. They can come to you and you can give them ideas, point them in a direction, give them feedback, or actually even assist in getting the work completed. That's
absolutely right. When I was studying music in college, I was playing bass at the time, and my bass teacher was sort of preparing me to be able to work commercially and this kind of thing. And I said, how do you decide, you play jazz. How did you decide to play jazz as opposed to playing in a reggae band or in a pop band? And he said, man, you say yes to the gigs that people call you for. And that's how you find your niche. And I think the workplace is exactly the same thing. I'm not the person to stand up a project management team with, Gantt charts and, check-in meetings and tiger teams and, Six Sigma, all the rest of that. I'm not that person. And so people don't ask me for that. But we hire people who are incredibly good at that and let them just be the best in the world at that aspect of leadership. There's I'll give you a little, your listeners may or may not like this, but I love this leadership model of the seer, the fixer, and the runner. And these are 3 dovetailing and sort of coexisting leadership mindsets and skill sets that work very, very well in concert. The seer is the person who's focused on the future, big decisions, unblocking, and clearing what we call clearing fog, making big decisions, providing that vision. It's a lot of storytelling. It's a lot of communication. It's, a lot of big, scary, imperfect information decisions. And then you have the fixer, who's the person who just wants to airdrop into the hardest, gnarliest problem that you have in the business and get it running. If it's a technology problem or a people problem or a process problem or all of the above, just dive in and get it sorted and then go on to the next extremely difficult thing. And then you have the runner, who is the operational, black belt, and just focuses on taking this process, taking these decisions and executing, finishing at a very, very high level. And if you can kind of get the DNA across a group of leaders right with that mindset, it's really awesome. I have 2 engineering leaders that I partner with here, and we use that, and we actually are very explicit about it. And when we have a challenge, we divide that challenge up based on the seer part, the fixer part, and the runner part. And that really clarifies the roles, and it lets us all go do our piece of it to the best of our ability, and really, frankly, playing to our strengths and in a way that's really fun.
Yeah, and the way to grow a business is really to identify people, surround yourself with people who can fill all of those roles and not try to be that person, not try to play all those roles yourself, because we each come to the table with different leadership attributes and strengths. And I love that analogy. I don't know why the listeners wouldn't enjoy it, but I think that they will. Christopher, as our time runs down here, I'd love to shift gears just a bit and talk what we call learning from leaders and find out a little bit more about you. Sound okay?
Sounds great.
All right. Our first question then is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table. What are you reading these days?
I'm reading When by Daniel Pink. I'm fascinated with this idea of scheduling your time in your life so that it really takes advantage of when you have creative energy, and really being smart about how you use your time. I think time is our most valuable asset, but we don't really take inventory of it or apply it, budget it the way that we do with, say, finances. So I'm sort of fascinated by that topic.
Yeah, and have you read like Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi or what's the other one? Deep Work by Cal Newport? How does it compare to those kind of books?
I have not read those. I'm familiar with Flow, but I have not read those. I got to go check those out.
Very similar idea. There seems to be this groundswell of discussion right now about identifying when you're working at your peak optimal time and really focusing in and doing that work then, and allowing some of the other day-to-day admin tasks that we all have to deal with go at the times that you're not necessarily at your highest and best. So love that recommendation. Our second question then is your leadership superpower.
I think it's a superpower and also the super liability, but it is this idea of managing like I'm going to work for the people on my team, and giving them autonomy and giving them the space to fail. It is, based on the feedback that I get as a leader, it's the number one reason people like being on teams that I am lucky enough to lead. And it can also be totally terrifying and, a negative experience when you get in a little bit over your head. And perhaps, I need to be better at jumping in and, solving problems for people when they really want it, whether they're saying that explicitly or not. But what it does do is it brings people along in their careers very quickly and gives you a deep bench as a leader. I probably have 5 people on my team that could easily do my job if I were hit by a bus. And I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. And especially in this day of kind of ego-driven leadership, this is a great perspective of saying, look, I'm important to the team, but I've also developed my team such that the company will continue on, the business will grow if for any reason, heaven forbid buses, but whatever else may happen, or even if I were to be traded to a different team or choose to go to a different team, I'm not going to leave this place worse off than I was here because the team I've developed can carry the mantle. So I love that. Next question then is the book that you most often gift or refer to friends, family, and colleagues.
Well, it is definitely, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but it is definitely Story Brand by Donald Miller. I got the audiobook and then I just ordered 30 copies. I have them by my desk, and anybody I can, hassle in the hallway to hear me out for 30 seconds, I give them a copy. And it's really given tons of people around me on my team, on different teams, all kinds of neat ideas and help them build the narrative for whatever work that they're doing. So it's a quick read. He's a great writer. So definitely Story Brand. I love that book.
Well, before we let you go for today, and thank you especially for coming on and being a great leader for us and sharing so much valuable insight. Before we let you go, any last bit of advice and share with us, how can we pick up some of your music, talk about, find out more about you and connect?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, check the band out, guys. Theproviders.com. You can sign up there and get our videos and songs as we release them. We have an amazing team of people working on the record right now, and we'll continue releasing music. We want to do much more of a modern take where we're releasing music every month, every quarter, and telling the stories around the songs, back to that storytelling aspect. So check that out. And also on the tech side, hubspot.com/jobs. We're hiring hundreds of roles. We have positions that allow remote work. We have 8 offices around the world. And we would love to get to know you, whoever you are. If you're listening in your car on your way to work and you think it would be fun to come work with us, find a minute and pull up hubspot.com/jobs and see if we're worth talking to. I think it's a wonderful place to work. We're consistently rated, top 10 places in the U.S. to work, best place in Boston to work, best place in Ireland to work. And so I really encourage people to check that out.
Well, very cool. And we'll link all of that up on the show notes so they can go to one spot and get all the quotes, the books, everything that we talked about. Christopher, again, thank you for coming on the show. You do so much for your community, for your, for the leadership style and brand in this story. Thank you for being this week's guest leadership expert.
Thank you, Jake, very much for having me. It was entirely my pleasure.
All right, my friends. As we were talking with Christopher, I couldn't help but think of that quote by Sheryl Sandberg. If you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask what seat, just get on. And I think that's kind of the message and lesson that we want to take from this sit down with Christopher. And that is, look for rocket ships. And when you find yourself sitting on one, hold on tight because opportunity is out there. There's so many nuggets of value in this episode where we talk about, you don't have to bat 1,000, but you do want to be an all-star. You do want to find yourself batting better than the average. And what is it going to take for you to develop others around you? How can you be an agent and not just the quarterback or the manager or the owner, but really be an agent to develop other people? This is the Modern Leadership Podcast. How do you become the leader that your team wants to follow? Of course, everything that we talked about in this episode of the podcast can be found on the show notes, jakeacarlson.com/ML148, episode 148. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. And remember, everything is figure-outable. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.